My name is Mason Vance. I run a place called the Iron Church, about 40 miles outside of Las Vegas. To the IRS, it's a salvage yard. To the handful of collectors who actually have my private number, it's the only place on the West Coast where you can bring a rusted-out heap of Italian steel and drive away in a $1 million restoration. I like cars. They make sense. If a car is broken, you find the bad part, you cut it out, and you weld in a new one. People aren't like that. People are rusted all the way through. That's why I live out here, surrounded by 10 acres of chain link fence and scrap metal, with nothing but the wind and the coyotes for company. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 110 degrees in the shade. The air in the main bay smelled like ozone and burning grease. I was under the lift, welding a subframe on a '69 Charger, sparks showering down around me like angry fireflies. I had my welding mask on, the world reduced to a puddle of molten steel and the hum of the arc. I didn't hear the gate open. I didn't hear the car pull up. The first thing I noticed was the change in the light. A shadow fell across the concrete floor, blocking the harsh Nevada sun streaming through the bay door. I killed the torch and flipped up my mask. Standing in the doorway of my garage, surrounded by piles of greasy transmissions and engine blocks, was a hallucination. She was young, maybe 23. She had long, dark hair that was tangled from the wind, and she was wearing a silver sequined cocktail dress that belonged in a high-roller suite, not a junkyard. It was torn at the hem and fit her like a second skin, cut dangerously low in the front, struggling to contain curves that had no business being in the middle of the desert. She was shivering despite the heat. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She was clutching a manila envelope to her chest so hard her knuckles were white. I rolled out from under the lift, wiping my hands on a rag. I stood up to my full height, 6'4", 250 pounds of tattoos and muscle. Most people take a step back when I stand up. She didn't move. She just stared at me with eyes that looked like shattered glass. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice rasping from the welding fumes. "You look like you took a wrong turn at the strip." She swallowed hard. She looked at the tattoos on my arms, then at the blowtorch in my hand, then back to my face. "Are you Mason?" she whispered. "Depends who's asking." She took a shaky step forward, her high heels clicking on the oil-stained concrete. She held out the envelope. "My father sent me. He said the debt is settled." I frowned, not taking the envelope. "Your father? Who's your father?" "Jimmy the Ace Russo," she said. The name meant nothing to me. "He said he lost the game last night. He said he bet everything he had, and you won." She took a deep breath, the silver dress straining as her chest rose and fell. She dropped the envelope on the workbench next to a pile of rusty bolts. "He said I'm the collateral," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "1 year. I work for you. I do whatever you say, and the debt is wiped clean." I stared at her. Then I stared at the envelope. I picked it up and ripped it open. Inside was a handwritten contract on a cocktail napkin, signed with a shaky scrawl, and a set of car keys for a BMW that I assumed was parked outside. I looked back at her. She was bracing herself, closing her eyes like she expected me to hit her. Or worse. "Lady," I said, tossing the napkin back onto the bench, "I haven't played poker in 10 years, and if I did, I sure as hell wouldn't bet for you." Her eyes snapped open. "What?" "I don't know who your father is," I growled, walking over to the sink to scrub the grease off my hands. "But he didn't lose you to me. I don't want a human. I barely want the customers I already have." She looked around the shop, panic starting to set in. "But he gave me the coordinates. He said if I didn't come here, the men he owes money to would kill us both. He said you were the only one who would accept the trade." I stopped scrubbing. I looked at her reflection in the dirty mirror above the sink. She wasn't lying. She was terrified. "He lied to you," I said flatly. "There is no trade. Go home." I can't, she screamed, the desperation finally breaking through. He's gone. He cleared out the apartment this morning. He took the car, the cash, everything. He dropped me at the end of your dirt road and told me to walk. I have nowhere to go. She slumped against the workbench, burying her face in her hands, sobbing. The silver dress caught the light, sparkling mockingly in the gloom of the garage. I stood there, listening to her cry, feeling a headache starting behind my eyes. A con man father, a fake debt, and a girl who looked like a chaotic angel dumped on my doorstep. I wiped my hands on a towel and sighed. What's your name? Elena, she choked out. All right, Elena, I said, kicking a clean stool toward her. Sit down before you pass out. I'm going to make a call, and then we're going to find out who actually owns this imaginary debt. I spent an hour on the phone in my office, calling every contact I had in Vegas. Bookies, bouncers, guys who knew guys. Nobody had heard of a poker game involving my name. But a few of them knew Jimmy Russo. They called him a ghost. A guy who racked up debts, sold his friends down the river, and vanished before the cement dried. When I walked back out onto the shop floor, the sun was starting to dip, casting long, bloody shadows across the desert. I stopped dead in my tracks. Elena wasn't sitting on the stool where I'd left her. She was over by the transmission bench. She had found a push broom that was twice her size and was trying to sweep the metal shavings off the concrete. It was a pathetic, mesmerizing sight. The silver sequins of her dress were flashing under the fluorescent lights. Her high heels were clicking unevenly on the floor as she struggled to push the heavy broom. Every time she bent forward to reach a corner, the dress strained against her curves, looking like it was about to split at the seams. She was sweating. Her hair was sticking to her neck, but she was sweeping like her life depended on it. "What the hell are you doing?" I barked, my voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. She jumped, nearly dropping the broom. She spun around, eyes wide with panic. I'm working," she stammered. "The contract said labor. I can clean. I can organize. I'm fast." "Put the broom down," I said, walking toward her. "No, please." She gripped the handle tighter, her knuckles white. "I know you said the debt isn't real, but if he promised you, I have to make it right. If I don't, maybe you'll send me back, and if I go back, they'll find me." She was shaking. She really believed that I was the monster in this story. She thought if she didn't scrub the floor, I'd toss her to the wolves. I stopped a few feet from her. Up close, she smelled like expensive vanilla perfume and ozone. The contrast between her delicate, terrified features and the grime of my shop was jarring. "Look at yourself, Elena," I said, gesturing to her outfit. "You're wearing a disco ball. You can't work in a shop dressed like that. You're going to trip and crack your head open, or catch that dress in a belt sander." She looked down at her attire, her face flushing pink. "It's all I have. He didn't let me pack a bag." I let out a long, frustrated breath. I rubbed the back of my neck, looking at the ceiling. I have a rule. No useless parts in my shop, and right now, you're a safety hazard. I walked over to the employee lockers that hadn't been used in 5 years because I fired everyone for incompetence. I yanked one open and pulled out a pair of my old navy blue coveralls. They were stained with oil and faded from the sun, but they were clean. I tossed them at her. She caught the bundle against her chest, the rough fabric clashing with the sequins. "Put those on," I ordered. "There's a bathroom in the back, and for God's sake, take off the heels. You can wear a pair of my work boots. There'll be clown shoes on you, but at least you won't break an ankle." She looked at the coveralls, then at me. "Does this mean I can stay?" "It means I'm not driving you back to Vegas in the dark," I grunted. "There's an Airstream trailer out back behind the impound lot. It has AC and a lock on the door. You stay there tonight." "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the greasy coveralls like they were silk. "Don't thank me yet," I muttered, turning back to my welding rig. "You haven't seen the bathroom." 10 minutes later, she came back out. My breath hitched in my throat. She had put on the coveralls, but they were massive on her. She had rolled the pant legs up a dozen times so she could walk in the boots. But it was the top that killed me. She hadn't pulled the sleeves up. Instead, she had tied the arms of the coveralls around her waist, letting the top half hang down like a skirt. She was still wearing the top of the silver dress. The dark blue canvas tied tight around her waist only emphasized the hourglass curve of her hips and the extreme fullness of her chest spilling out of the sequins above. She looked like a mechanic's pin-up calendar come to life. Rough, dirty, and incredibly sexy. She stood there, shifting her weight in the oversized boots, waiting for orders. "Better?" she asked tentatively. I forced myself to look away, grabbing a wrench just to have something to hold. "Yeah," I lied, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Much better. Now sit down and don't touch anything. I have an engine to finish." I went back to work, but for the rest of the night, every time I saw a flash of silver in my peripheral vision, my hand slipped. This was going to be a long year. The next morning, the desert sun hit the airstream like a hammer. I woke up on the couch in my office. I hadn't gone back to the main house. I didn't trust the situation enough to leave the lot unguarded. I walked into the shop, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, expecting to find Elena cowering in the trailer. Instead, I smelled coffee. She was standing by the workbench, fiddling with my ancient drip machine. She was still wearing the absurd outfit, my navy blue coveralls tied around her waist, the silver sequined top shimmering in the morning light, and my heavy work boots looking ridiculous on her feet. She looked up when I walked in. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she managed a weak smile. "I found the coffee," she said. "I hope that's okay. I didn't know how strong you like it, so I just used all of it." I took the mug she offered. It was sludge, hot, bitter sludge. "Perfect," I grunted, taking a sip. "Listen, Elena, we need to talk." I walked over to my desk and picked up a stack of papers I'd printed out at 4 a.m. I had called in a favor from a friend who worked in digital forensics for the Gaming Commission. "I found your dad," I said, leaning against the desk. Her eyes lit up with hope. "Is he okay? Is he coming back?" "He's in Mexico," I said bluntly. "He crossed the border at Tijuana 3 hours ago, and he's not coming back." The hope drained out of her face, replaced by a confused hurt. "But the debt. He said he had to settle it with you first." I tossed the papers onto the workbench. "There is no debt with me, Elena. I told you that." "But there is a debt." I pointed to a blurry surveillance photo on the top of the stack. It showed her father shaking hands with a man in a white suit at a backroom table in the Bellagio. "Your dad owes 300 grand to the Vargas cartel," I said. "They run the loan sharking for half the strip. They don't take labor contracts, and they don't take IOUs. They take kneecaps." Elena gripped the edge of the workbench, her knuckles turning white. "I don't understand. If he owes them, why send me to you?" "Because of my reputation," I said, my voice low. "I did some work for the wrong people a long time ago. People in Vegas know that you don't mess with Mason Vance. They know this scrapyard is a fortress." I took a step closer to her. "He didn't trade you to me, Elena. He used you as a human shield. He sent you here knowing the cartel would track his phone to this location. He figured if they saw you were with me, they'd hesitate. They'd think twice about coming onto my land. He used you to buy himself a 12-hour head start to the border." The silence in the shop was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Elena stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the realization crashing down on her. He used me as bait?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "He left me here to die?" "He left you here because he's a coward," I growled. "And he hoped I was scary enough to keep the wolves at bay." She crumbled. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the front of the workbench, landing in a heap of blue canvas and silver sequins on the dirty floor. She buried her face in her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was a gut-wrenching sight. A girl who had tried so hard to be strong, to pay a debt she thought was honorable, realizing she was nothing but spare parts to the man who was supposed to protect her. I'm not a comforter. I don't do hugs. But I couldn't just stand there. I walked over and crouched down in front of her. I reached out, my large calloused hand hovering for a second before I placed it awkwardly on her shoulder. "Get up, Elena," I said softly. She looked up, tears streaking through the grease smudges on her cheeks. "Why? What's the point? They're coming, aren't they? The cartel." "Yeah," I said, standing up and pulling her with me. "They're coming." I walked over to the wall and pulled a heavy tarp off a pristine, matte black 1970 Chevelle SS. I opened the trunk. Inside wasn't a spare tire. It was a terrifying array of hardware: shotguns, ammo crates, and tools that weren't for fixing cars. I turned back to her, my expression hard. "Your dad was right about one thing," I said, racking the slide on a 12 gauge. "They should be scared to come onto my land." I looked her in the eye. "You're not bait anymore, Elena. You're under new management. Go to the trailer and lock the door. I have some cleaning up to do." I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes after I locked Elena in the trailer, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It grew bigger, moving fast, churning up the dry desert floor. 3 black Escalades, tinted windows, moving in a phalanx. I walked to the main gate. I didn't lock it. A lock won't stop a truck, but an open gate makes people hesitate. It makes them wonder what you're inviting them into. I stood in the center of the driveway, holding a 3-foot breaker bar in one hand. I left the shotgun leaning against a stack of tires just out of sight. I wanted them to see me first. The lead SUV skidded to a halt 10 feet from me. The doors opened. 4 men stepped out. They were wearing expensive suits that were already collecting dust, sweating in the heat. The guy in front was Silvio, a mid-level enforcer I'd crossed paths with years ago. He looked like a lizard in a Hugo Boss suit. "Vance," Silvio nodded, adjusting his sunglasses. "You look rusty." "You look lost, Silvio," I replied, not moving a muscle. "The highway is that way." Silvio chuckled, but his eyes were scanning the yard, looking at the piles of scrap metal, the shadowy bays of the garage. "We're not lost. We're tracking a rat. Jimmy Russo. Phone signal pinged here." "Jimmy was here," I admitted calmly. "He left hours ago, headed south." "We know," Silvio said, his smile fading. "But he didn't leave alone. He left a package, a girl." I leaned on the breaker bar. "I didn't see a package. I saw a scared kid he dumped like garbage." Silvio took a step forward. "That kid is collateral, Mason. Russo owes 300 large. The girl comes with us until he pays up. Hand her over and we leave your rust buckets in peace." I looked at Silvio. Then I looked at his men. They were reaching into their jackets. "You know the rules of the desert, Silvio," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "What you find on your land, you keep. Russo abandoned the property. She belongs to the yard now." Silvio's face hardened. "She's not a transmission, Vance. She's flesh and blood, and you don't have the manpower to stop us." He signaled his men. They drew their weapons, Glocks, shiny and black. "Mason!" I cursed under my breath. Elena had burst out of the airstream. She was running toward us, stumbling in my oversized boots, the silver sequins flashing in the sun. She looked terrified, but she wasn't running away. She was running to me. "Stop!" she screamed, throwing herself between me and the guns. She stood there, chest heaving, her arms spread wide. "Don't shoot him. I'm the one you want." It was the bravest, stupidest thing I'd ever seen. Silvio laughed. "Well, that makes it easier. Come here, sweetheart." One of the goons lunged for her, grabbing her arm. I didn't think. The breaker bar moved. I swung it like a baseball bat. It connected with the goon's forearm with a sickening crack. He screamed, dropping his gun, clutching his shattered arm. I grabbed Elena by the back of the coveralls and yanked her behind me, putting my massive frame between her and the bullets. That, I roared, was a mistake. I whistled sharp and loud. From the shadows of the car crusher, a massive electromagnet swung into view. I'd rigged the remote in my pocket. The magnet, weighing 2 tons, swung low over the lead Escalade. I hit the button. The magnet didn't pick up the car. It smashed down onto the hood, crushing the engine block flat in an explosion of steam and oil. The SUVs rocked from the impact. Silvio and his men jumped back, terrified. I picked up the shotgun from the tire stack and pumped it one-handed. "This is an industrial salvage yard, Silvio," I shouted over the hissing steam. "I have crushers, shredders, and furnaces that melt steel at 2,000 degrees. You fire one shot, and I will turn every one of you into a soup can before you hit the ground." Silvio looked at the crushed SUV. He looked at his screaming man. He looked at the shotgun pointed at his chest. He spat on the ground. "You're crazy, Vance. You always were." "Get off my land," I said. "Take your trash with you." They dragged the injured man into the second SUV. Silvio glared at me through the window. "We'll be back, Mason, and next time, we bring the heavy stuff." They peeled out, leaving the crushed Escalade smoking in my driveway. I waited until the dust settled before I lowered the gun. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a piston. I turned to Elena. She was shaking, staring at the crushed car, then at me. "You," she whispered, "you crushed a car." "I told you," I said, my voice rough. "I fix what's broken, and I crush what's useless." I looked down at her. "Why did you run out here, Elena? You could have been killed." She looked up at me, her eyes fierce. "You were standing there alone. I wasn't going to let you die for my dad's mistake." I looked at her. Grease on her cheek, sequins in the sun. Fear and fire in her eyes. Something inside my chest, something that had been rusted shut for a decade, cracked open. "Come on," I said, putting a heavy hand on her back to guide her inside. "We need to barricade the gate. They'll come back at night." Night fell over the desert like a shroud. We had barricaded the main gate with a row of junked cars, creating a wall of steel that no SUV could ram through. The yard was silent, save for the distant howl of coyotes and the hum of the sodium floodlights. Inside the garage, the air was thick with heat and tension. I was sitting on the bumper of the Chevelle, cleaning the shotgun. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Silvio wouldn't come back tonight. He was a bully, not a soldier. He'd wait for reinforcements. That gave us until dawn. I heard the water running in the utility sink. I looked up. Elena was standing there, trying to scrub the oil and desert dust off her face and arms. She had unzipped the heavy canvas coveralls to the waist to deal with the heat. The sleeves were tied around her hips again, leaving her upper body exposed in the silver sequined bodice of her ruined dress. The sequins were dull now, smeared with grease. Her hair was messy, falling in damp waves around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, battered, and utterly magnificent. She turned off the tap and turned to face me, drying her hands on a shop rag. "They're gone, aren't they?" she asked softly. "For now," I said, snapping the shotgun back together. "But a guy like Silvio doesn't like looking weak. He'll be back with friends." She walked over to me, her boots scuffing on the concrete. She stopped a few feet away, leaning against the fender of a '67 Mustang. The light from the overhead lamp caught the curve of her neck, the deep shadow of her cleavage. "You could have given me to them," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question. When Silvio asked, "You could have handed me over and gone back to welding. Why didn't you?" I set the gun down and wiped my hands on my thighs. I looked at her, really looked at her. "I told you," I murmured. "I don't like waste, and I don't like bullies." "That's not it," she said, taking a step closer. She smelled like industrial soap and fear. You risked your life, Mason. You crushed a car. You stood in front of a gun. Why? I stood up. I towered over her, my shadow swallowing her whole. Because you ran to me, I said, my voice rough. Everyone runs away from me, Elena. My whole life, people take one look at the tattoos, the grease, the size of me, and they run the other way. You're the first person in 10 years who looked at me and saw safety instead of a monster. Her breath hitched. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. The air between us crackled, hotter than the welding torch. I don't see a monster, she whispered. She reached out, her small hand touching the tattoo on my forearm, a gear shift pattern interwoven with skulls. Her fingers were cool against my burning skin. I see the only man who ever stood up for me. My father. He sold me to save himself. You fought for me, and you don't even know my last name. I know enough, I growled. I reached out, my hand cupping her jaw. My thumb brushed against her lower lip, smearing a trace of oil there. She didn't flinch. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering shut. You're not collateral, Elena, I said, my voice dropping to a rumble. And you're not a debt. You're mine now, under my protection. And if Silvio or your father or anyone else tries to touch you, I will burn this whole desert down. She opened her eyes. They were dark, dilated. Then don't let them take me, she breathed. Never, I swore. I wanted to kiss her. God, I wanted to kiss her. The impulse was a physical ache in my chest. But I stopped. The night wasn't over, and we weren't safe yet. I pulled my hand away slowly, stepping back. Get some sleep in the office, I said, my voice tight. I'll take the first watch. Tomorrow we go on the offensive. I'm done playing defense. She nodded, looking dazed. She walked toward the office, pausing at the door to look back at me. The silver dress shimmered one last time before she disappeared into the dark. I turned back to the dark yard, gripping the shotgun. Let them come. I finally had something worth fighting for. Dawn broke over the junkyard in a bleed of purple and orange. We hadn't slept. We spent the night prepping, moving cars to create choke points, rigging the floodlights, turning the yard into a maze of steel and shadows. At 6 a.m., the dust cloud returned. This time, it wasn't 3 SUVs. It was a convoy. Silvio had brought a flatbed truck and a dozen men. He wasn't playing games anymore. I stood by the open gate again, but this time I wasn't holding a breaker bar. I was holding a cell phone and a piece of paper. Elena was behind me, hidden in the cab of the crane, watching through the mesh cage. I told her to stay put no matter what happened. The convoy stopped. Silvio stepped out, looking smug. He had a bandage on his arm and a submachine gun in his hand. Last chance, Mason, he shouted over the idling engines. Give us the girl, D, or we burn this pile of rust to the ground. I didn't raise my voice. I just held up the phone. I'm on the line with Mr. Vargas. Silvio froze. The smugness evaporated. You're bluffing. You don't know the boss. I fixed his 1930 Cadillac 516 last year, I said calmly. I put it on speaker. Go ahead, ask him. Silvio stared at me, sweat beading on his forehead. I tapped the speaker button. Silvio? A gravelly voice crackled through the phone. Are you at Mason's shop? Yes, boss, Silvio stammered. Stand down, Vargas ordered. Mr. Vance and I have come to an arrangement. Silvio looked confused. But the debt, the 300 grand. It's paid, I cut in, tossing the piece of paper at Silvio's feet. It was a bank transfer receipt. Wire transfer cleared 10 minutes ago, 300,000. Plus a 10% inconvenience fee for the damage you did to my driveway. Silvio picked up the paper, his hands shaking. You paid it? I sold the Chevelle, I said, my voice flat. The matte black one you were eyeing yesterday. A collector in Dubai wired the funds overnight. It was a lie. I didn't sell it to a collector. I sold it to Vargas himself for half its value just to end this. But Silvio didn't need to know that. The debt is cleared, I said, stepping closer to Silvio until I was looming over him. Which means Elena is no longer collateral. She's a free citizen. And if you or anyone from your crew ever comes within 10 miles of her again, I won't crush your car, Silvio. I'll put you in the crusher. Silvio swallowed hard. He looked at the receipt, then at the phone, then at me. He holstered his gun. "Let's go," he barked to his men. They reversed out of the drive, the heavy tires kicking up dust, and disappeared back toward the highway. I stood there until the dust settled, listening to the silence return to the desert. I heard the crane door open. Elena climbed down, stumbling in the heavy boots. She ran to me, grabbing my arm, looking at the empty road. "They're gone?" she breathed. "They're gone," I said. Vargas accepted the payment. "You're free, Elena. Your dad's debt is 0. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "You paid it? With your car? That's Chevelle. You've been working on that for 3 years. You said it was your masterpiece." "It's just metal," I shrugged, turning away so she wouldn't see the regret in my eyes. "Cars can be replaced. People can't." I walked back toward the garage. "You can take the truck. Drive to Vegas. Catch a flight to anywhere you want. You're safe now." I went into the shop and started cleaning up the tools, trying to look busy. I heard her footsteps behind me. She didn't go to the truck. She walked right up to me and put her hand on the wrench I was holding, stopping me. "You sold your car for me," she whispered. "I needed the space," I lied. She looked around the shop, the grease, the darkness, the isolation. Then she looked down at herself. The ruined silver dress, the oversized coveralls, the oil stains on her skin. "I have nowhere to go, Mason," she said softly. "My dad is gone. My apartment is gone. My life in Vegas is over." She took the wrench from my hand and set it on the bench. She stepped closer, closing the gap between us. "And besides," she said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips, "you fired your last assistant. You need someone to manage the books, someone who knows how to handle sharks." I looked down at her. "It's dirty work, Elena. It's hot. It's lonely out here." "I'm not lonely," she said, rising on her tiptoes. "Not anymore." She kissed me then. It wasn't tentative. It was fierce, tasting of adrenaline and promise. I wrapped my arms around her waist, lifting her up onto the workbench, burying my face in the curve of her neck. "You're staying?" I rumbled against her skin. "Try and make me leave," she whispered. I didn't try. We never heard from her father again. Rumor has it he's running a scam in Belize. But Elena didn't care. She traded the silver dress for a pair of fitted coveralls and steel-toe boots. She runs the office now, and she's tougher than any enforcement crew Vargas has. The Iron Church is still a fortress, but it's not empty anymore. And the best thing I ever found in this scrapyard wasn't a vintage engine. It was the girl who showed up in a sequined dress and refused to break.